Masechet Gittin Daf Peh Dalid. Until now, we've been talking about a case where a husband gives a get to his wife and says, behold, you are permitted to everyone except for the Uven. Now we're going to see the opposite case. He gives a get to his wife and says, here, this is your get, but you can marry only the Uven and nobody else. So what's the status of such a clause? Tenor Banan. Hareze gitech amena shetinasei lifloni. Harezo lo tinase v'im niset lo tese. So this Braita says, if he gives a get and says you can marry only this particular person, we'll call him Reuven, she may not get married, and if she did get married, b'di'avad, she does not have to leave her husband. So we're going to analyze who can she not marry, and who would she not have to leave. Who is this talking about? That guy or other people? Mai ka'amar, amar Rav Nachman, hachi ka'amar, harezo lo tinase lo, shema yomeru neshehen notnin b'matana, v'im niset la'ached lo teseh. Nachman explains, she may not marry that guy, Reuven. Why? Because people will say, it looks like that the first husband is giving his wife over as a gift to his friend. Oh, so, it's like wife swapping. And this is totally improper, even though technically they're getting divorced and now she'll marry, then she will be permitted to this other second person. So from the letter of the law, it's they're not violating anything, but this is an indecent proposal. And therefore, the rabbi said, don't get married. However, if she gets married to a different person, not to the Uven, then she can stay married to that person and doesn't have to leave. So basically, according to Rav Nachman, she has to do the opposite of what the condition says. The husband says you can marry only the Uven. She should not marry the Uven. If she marries somebody else, then we let her stay. ומשום גזרה למה פקינן מיניה ושרין את אשת איש לעלמא. The Gemara asks against Rav Nachman, okay, because of a gezerah, we understand your gezerah. This is very indecent for people to give over their wives as like a gift. Nevertheless, because of a gezerah, if she marries someone else, we're going to let her stay married to someone else. She is an eshet ish, because there's a condition in this get, and she did not fulfill the condition because she's not marrying Reuven. Therefore, the get is invalid. If the get is invalid, she is still married to the first husband. If she goes and is with someone else, that's eshet ish. So, as much as we're all concerned about the indecency and the reason they have to make a gezerah, still you can't just permit an eshet ish. Ela amar Rav Nachman. Rather, this is what Rav Nachman must have meant to say, hachi ka'amar, hare zo lo tinase lo, shema yomeru neshehen notnim b'matana. That part is the same. She may not marry the Uven because it looks indecent. V'im niset lo tese demishum gezerah lo mapikinan. However, let's say she did go and she married the Uven. So from the letter of the law, it's valid because she fulfilled the condition that the husband said. So she should not do so because it looks indecent. If she did, then we're not going to make her get divorced because of a gezerah. It's not in any case necessarily that it's because of giving over as a gift. It could be she really does want to, and she's going to stay with him, and it's it's all above board. So it could be fine. So we don't want it lechatechila b'diavad. She can stay. Amar le Rava lo hu de lo tinaseh ha leacher tinaseh. Rava asks Rav Nachman, you said that lechatechila she should not marry Reuven, that person. Can I infer from your statement that she cannot marry that person, but other people she could marry? Is that what you're saying? But she did not fulfill her condition by marrying Reuven. If the condition is not fulfilled, then the get is invalid. So how could you imply that she can marry other people? וכי תמה אפשר דמינס בהיום ומגרשה למחר מקיימה לתנאה. And so maybe you'll say as follows, let her marry some other guy, Shimon, not related, right? She can marry Shimon today, and then after some time, she will get divorced from Shimon, and then she can marry Reuven. See, the original husband said this is a valid get as long as you marry Reuven. He didn't say you have to marry Reuven tomorrow or first. You just have to eventually, at some point, marry Reuven. So maybe indeed Rav Nachman did mean that it's okay to marry other people as long as you have in mind, listen, at some point later, at some point during my lifetime and his lifetime, I'm gonna have to make sure to be married to Reuven. And now, can you do that? Right? So this could work. Logically, it works. Now, should one set herself up in a position where they're doing something now, but it will only be okay if a condition is fulfilled later, because it's a bit risky? Well, we have a parallel case. And this would be similar to the halacha over which you disagree with Rav Yehuda. Ti'itmar, kunam aynai b'shena hayom im ishan lemachar. Amar Rav Yehuda, al yishan hayom shema yishan lemachar. Rav Nachman amar, yishan hayom ve'en chosheshin shema ishan lemachar. If a person says, sleeping is prohibited to me today if I sleep tomorrow. So in other words, if he ends up sleeping tomorrow, then he better have made sure that he didn't sleep today. And if he does sleep today, then he better make sure he doesn't sleep tomorrow in order not to trigger the vow and the consequence of having slept yesterday. So now the question is, can he sleep today? And he'll make sure not to sleep tomorrow. So Rav Yehuda says, no, don't put yourself into such a precarious position. Do not sleep today, because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. You may be very tired and fall asleep tomorrow, and then you will have violated your vow. So don't put yourself in such a position. In that case, also, a woman should not go marry Shimon and then say, eventually I'll marry Reuven. Maybe it won't happen. Rav Nachman, however, says you can sleep today, and we're not worried that you're going to sleep tomorrow. Right? You'll make sure to stay up tomorrow. And so this would be according to Rav Nachman, who said the original law, so it would be consistent. Rav Nachman, just like he says, it's okay to sleep today and make sure to stay awake tomorrow. So too, he says, she can marry anyone she wants now, as long as she will make sure to get divorced soon and marry Reuven, and therefore will have fulfilled her condition. So we say, wait a second, but this is not comparable. Hachi hashta hatam bedide kaima ti ba'e mavriz nafshe besilvata vela naim hacha bedida kaima li'igarushe. The two cases are not comparable. Over there, in the case of sleeping, it's all up to him. He can decide whether he wants to sleep or not, right? And he'll sleep today. And the next day, if he feels sleepy, he'll prick himself with thorns, wake himself up. And so it's up to him, right? A person can control himself. You can't stay awake indefinitely. But for a day, you can make sure to stay awake. So if it's something that's in your capability to control, then that's okay. You can put yourself in such a position. But here, it's not up to her to get divorced. If she marries Shimon, so she can request a divorce, but it's ultimately up to Shimon to decide whether he's going to give her a get. And so she cannot guarantee that she can get out of that marriage so that she can fulfill the condition. So in such a case, everyone, even Rav Nachman, would agree that you cannot put yourself into a situation that you cannot guarantee that you will get out of it to fulfill the condition. So even Rav Nachman would not agree in such a case. Therefore, Rava challenges Rav Nachman and said, you can't possibly mean that to explain the Braita that she shouldn't marry Reuven, but she can marry someone else. Ela amar Rava, harezo lo tinase lo velo leacher, lo tinase shema yomeru neshotehen notnim b'matana, leacher no tinase debaya kiyume litna'a. Rava says this is the proper explanation of the Braita. When the husband says, here's a get on condition that you marry only Reuven, she may not marry Reuven and may not marry anybody else either. She cannot marry marry Reuven because this will look indecent. People are giving over their wives as gifts. And to others, she may not because she has to fulfill her condition. It's not a valid get unless she does so. So really, it's like there's no get at all here. Vimni set, however, bidi avad, if she does get married, lo tes, if she gets married to Reuven, bidi avad, it's okay. We, as a gezerah, it's indecent, but bidi avad, if you already did it, so we're not going to make you get divorced because of the gezerah. De mishum gezerah lama pikinan la'acher teseh de baya lekayume litna'a. But if she gets married to someone else, to Shimon, she has to get divorced because the condition is not fulfilled. So get divorced and go fulfill your condition. After that, if that marriage doesn't work out, then you can go and marry other people. Tanya kivatet de Rava, and we have another braita that supports Rava's interpretation. Harezo lo tinaseh, lo velo la'acher v'imniset, lo teseh la'acher teseh. When the braita says explicitly, she may not marry that person, she may not marry not that person, and not anyone else, b'diavad. If she married that person, Reuven, she does not have to get divorced. And marry anybody else, she does have to leave that husband. Good. Tenor Rabbanan. Harezi gitech amanat she'ta'ali larakia, amanat she'tiridi latehom, amanat she'tible'i kaneh shel arba amot, amanat she'tabi li kaneh ben me'a amma, amanat she'ta'abri et hayam hagadol bereglaich eno get. Interesting cases. Husband says, here is your get on condition that you do something impossible, that you go up to the sky. Well, they didn't have rocket ships yet. On condition that you go all the way down to the depths of the sea. They also didn't have submarines just yet. On condition that you swallow a reed that's 4 amot long. On condition that you bring me a reed that's 100 amot long. Or on condition that you walk over the Mediterranean Sea by foot. Since all these things are impossible, the get is invalid because there's no way you can fulfill the condition. Okay, that's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema Omer, Kazeh get. Rabbi Yehuda says in all these cases, the get is valid. We ignore the condition. Since the condition is impossible, so we just say the person was just saying nonsense, and we ignore it altogether, and the get is valid with no condition. Kelal Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, Kol Tanai She'i Efshar Lo Lekayemo Besofo, V'itna Alav Metechilato, Eno Ela Kemafliga Bidbarim Vekasher. And this is a general rule that Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema said. Any condition that you cannot fulfill it in the end, and yet, meaning at any point in the future, and yet the husband said it at the beginning when he gave the get, it's just hyperbole. He's just saying nonsense, and we ignore it and leave off the condition, and the get is in fact valid. So this is very important machloket. Okay, we're gonna analyze this, his exact wording. He says kazeh get, like this, right? And so the question is, what is kazeh? This is a limiting, right? Like this and only this is a get. We're going to analyze what cases would be excluded from this. And he says kelal, and he's adding a general rule. A general rule is an inclusive term, and so what other cases would it be including? Because there are cases that are in the middle, like doing something that's not permitted. Was that called something impossible, or was that possible to do? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav, halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. Rav says, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, and an impossible condition is voided, and the get is valid. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzhak, matnitin nami daika dekatane. Kol she'efshar lo lekaymo besofo v'itna alav betchilato tena'o kayam. Ha'i efshar tena'o batel shema'mina. We can infer that, in fact, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema from a different Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Baba Metziah that says any condition that one can fulfill at the end, if one puts the condition in now, the condition is valid, right? Even if you can't do it right now, as long as you can do it at the end, the condition is valid and you need to do it. We can infer from that Mishnah that if it's impossible to fulfill that condition ever, then the condition is void, and that leaves the condition just falls away, void, and that leaves, in this case, the get. The get is valid. So that's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema said. Ibaya lehu. Hareze gitech amanat shetocheli besar hazir. Mahu. Husband says, here is your get on condition that you eat this pig meat. What do we call that? Is that called a condition that's impossible to fulfill? And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, it's a valid get because it's a Jewish person, and she is talking about to the wife, and she cannot eat. So saying eat pig's meat is the same as saying walk over water, and therefore it's a valid get. That's the opinion of Abaye. Amar Abaye, he is the same thing, right? It doesn't matter if it's physically impossible or if it's legally, halachically impossible. The condition is void. The get is valid. Rava Amar, Rava says, no, it's not the same. She can eat it. She will violate a prohibition, and she'll get lashes for it, but it's possible to do. It's not legal to do, but it's possible. There's a difference between physically impossible and morally or legally impossible, and therefore Rava says this condition is valid, and she has to choose. If she wants to be divorced, she will have to go and violate the law, eat pig, suffer the consequences, and she'll be divorced, or she'll say, no, I don't want to violate the law, and then she will not be divorced, but the condition is binding. Okay, la baye kela la tuye besar hazir, le rava kaze le meute besar hazir. According to Abaye, the klal that Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema said, that any time a condition is impossible, it's voided, that klal is coming to include not only physically impossible things, but also legally impossible things as included, and those are voided. According to Rava, he's going to focus on the kazeh, limiting only this and only this. If it's physically impossible, then it's voided. But if it's physically possible to do, even though it's illegal, that is a valid condition, and it will have to be fulfilled. Me tibe. Now we have a challenge against Rava. הרי זה גיתך על מנת שתיבעלי לפלוני. נתקיימת תנאי, הרי זה גט, ואם לאו, אינו גט. A husband gives the wife a get and says, this is a valid get on condition that you have relations with that person. If she does that condition and has relations with that person, then the get is valid. If not, not. Now this is permitted because she is divorced, and when she goes and has relations with that person, so she's a single woman. It might be zenut if they're not married, but it's not violating eshet ish or any law. על מנת שלא תיבעלי לאבא ולאביך, אין חוששים שמא נבעלה להן. It says, here's your get on condition that you do not have relations with either your father or my father. Both of them, those are erva to her, on condition that you don't do that, when we assume that she didn't do that. There's no reason to presume that she might have committed incest. And so that that get would be certainly valid. That's the end of the Braita. We infer, V'ilu al menat shetiba'ali le'aba ul'avich lo katane labayanicha l'rava kashya. Notice that the Braita does not include a case, the opposite of the second case, more similar to the first one, on condition, here's your get on condition that you do have relations with either my father or your father. So it does not include that. That makes sense for Abaye, is not going to include that because that's a violation of Torah law, and therefore it's the same as something being physically impossible. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, that condition is null and void, and she would not have to do it. And so that's why it doesn't fit into this Braita, because we are only listing something that you have to fulfill the Tanai, otherwise it's not a get. So this case over here that it says, Ploni, who's permitted to her, yeah, that's a valid condition. But if it's someone prohibited to her, that's an invalid condition, and that's why the Braita doesn't mention it. But according to Rava, we have a question. Why not include that case as well? You already included the opposite case, do not have relations with father, so why not include the opposite? Here's your get if you do have relations with one of the fathers, And according to Rava, although that's prohibited, serious prohibition of irva, nevertheless it should be a valid condition. Not that anyone would recommend that she does this, right? But the point is that the get would be invalid because if she does not fulfill the condition. So why is it not included? Challenge to Rava. Amalach Rava, bishlama besar chazir efshad achla velakia. Ploni name efshad meshachda bebemamona. Ela abba ve'avich bedida kaima. Nehidi abda isura. Abba ve'avich mi avdi isura. Rava says, I'll explain to you why it's not in the Baraita. In the case of the pig, husband says, eat this is your get on condition that you eat pig. So that's a valid condition because she can decide if she wants to eat it and she'll get lashes for it. It's up to her to decide. We're not recommending that she do or not, but the point is that it's up to her. Also, with the condition in the Braita that you have relations with that person, so that's also in her power. Either that guy would want to, or even if he doesn't want to, you could pay him off and convince him to have relations, and so it's also within her power to go and do that. That's she's single, so it would be it's a permitted relationship. However, for one of the fathers, is that dependent on her? Even if she is so desperate to get out of the marriage that she would be willing to commit incest to do it, pretty desperate. But the father or father-in-law, would they violate a serious prohibition? So that they would not, even if you paid them a lot of money, they would not do that. And therefore, it's not within her power. And therefore, even according to Rava, this is considered the same as something that's physically impossible. It's the same as saying, here's your get if you walk on water. That's physically impossible. This one is legally, it's illegal and also impossible for her to take steps to not only she agrees to violate, she has to have someone else also agree to violate Irva. And so that's why even according to Rava, this would be considered like a physically impossible condition, and therefore it's null and void. This get is valid even if she doesn't sin. She shouldn't sin. So now going back to the formulation of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, he said a klal that's an inclusive thing. Anything physically impossible, the condition is void. That includes this kind of condition that you have relations with father or my father. That condition is totally void, and you don't fulfill the condition, and the get is valid. And that's what klal comes to include. Kazeh comes to exclude the case of basar chazir, that is considered a possible thing to do. That's not the same as the impossible. Kazeh means only walking on water. That's an impossible one, because physically impossible. But eating pig is a possible thing to do. It's in her power to decide if she wants to violate, suffer the consequences, and then have the divorce be valid. Abaye would say no. The kelal is the inclusive, is including eating pig. That's because it's illegal. It's impossible. It's the same as an impossible. It's like walking on water. You don't have to eat pig, and the get is valid. Kazeh lemeute peloni, and the kazeh is coming to exclude the case of when he says you have to have relations with that guy, even though that would be zinut, but because it's not impossible and it's not technically even illegal, even though it's not a good thing to do, nevertheless it's not illegal, so that's considered possible to do, and therefore the kazeh, walking on water, that is not valid, but having relations with that person when you're single is a valid condition. All right, so that solved that challenge against Rava. Now we have a challenge against Abaye. Ametibe. הרי גזגיתך על מנת שתאכלי בשר חזיר, ואם הייתה זרה, על מנת שתאכלי בתרומה, ואם הייתה נזירה, על מנת שתשתי יין. נתקיים התנאי, הרי זה גט, ואם לאו אינו גט. לרבה ניחא, לאביי קשיא. This Baraita, also found in the Tosefta, teaches if husband gives a get and says, here's your get on condition that you eat pig. If she was a non-Kohen, non-kohenet, on condition, meaning her father is not as Israel, and he says on condition that you eat terumah, which is prohibited to her. If she was a Nazirah, he says here's your get on condition that you drink wine. All these would be violations for her. If she fulfills the condition, then it's a get. She has to violate the law and eat it in order to receive a get. If she doesn't want to violate the law, that's nice and praiseworthy, but the get will be invalid. So this makes sense according to Rava, who says illegal actions are still possible actions, and therefore she has to fulfill the condition in order to receive a get. This is a challenge to Abaye, who says that if something is illegal, that's the same as it being impossible, and the get should be valid no matter what. So what's the answer? Amar lach Abaye misavrat ibra kolhi hamaneh rabbanan. Who said that this baraita is the opinion of everybody? Abaye and Rava were only arguing within the opinion of Yehuda ben Tema, who said that an impossible condition is invalid. But Rabbanan disagreed. Rabbanan in the Tanakama in that first baraita said that an impossible condition is effective. And if you say, here's your get, if you walk on water, then she has to walk on water. Obviously she can't, but so the get is invalid. They don't say that the condition is void. Rabbanan say the condition, every condition, no matter how impossible, is always a valid condition. And so, who said, why do you think that this baraita is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema? It's not. This is the opinion of Rabbanan. Good. Now we have another challenge to this opinion of this baraita. Isn't this making a stipulation that is against the Torah? And we have a general rule, anytime you make a condition that's against the Torah, that condition should be null and void, and therefore should be a good get, even if she doesn't eat the pig, because that's going against the Torah. אמר רב אדה ברת רב איקה כי אמרינא דמתנא מה שכתוב בתורה תנו בטל כגון שארה כסוטה ועונתה דהוא כעקר אבל הכא היא כעקרה. No, we only say that, apply this rule that the making a condition against the Torah is null and void if it's something, for example, a husband says, here you are in, this is your kiddushin, on condition that I don't have to provide for you food and shelter and clothing, conjugal rights, that I don't have to provide for you. That is against the Torah, says that every husband has to provide for his wife, and so that he's uprooting directly something in the Torah. But here, he's not uprooting it. She's the one doing it. He's saying, listen, if you want your get, go eat this pig. So he's not forcing her to eat the pig. She's the one that is up to her to decide. Should I eat the pig and be divorced or not? She's eating the pig. So he's not forcing that. Okay, so that's the answer, but not good enough. Matkif la ravina kilum ka'akra ihi ela lekayome litnai dide ishtakach deihu ka'akar. Ravina says no. She is only violating the Torah in order to fulfill his condition. So therefore, it's still his fault, right? That he set her up. That the only way she can get out of this is to eat pig. So therefore, really, he is responsible. He caused her to eat pig because that's the only condition, the only way she can get her get. So that should also be called Okeh Davar Min HaTorah, even though she is the one violating, he's the one that is setting up a situation that's causing her to do that. Ela Amar Ravina. Ravina said, therefore, tweak the formula a little, and you can explain it better. As an answer, Ki amrinan matnei ma shekatuv b'Torah teneo batel kegon she'era kisutav onata devadai ka'akar aval hacha mi kamar la la sagad la achla la techol v'la tigaresh. When do we apply this rule that a condition against the Torah is void? Only in the case like when the husband says, you are betrothed to me, but I'm not paying you anything, because there it's for sure 100% chance that he will violate, because they're going to be married and he has to provide food, clothing, and shelter to her. That's a basic condition of marriage. And so if he says, I'm not going to do that, so he will 100% surely violate this, and therefore it's null and void, and the condition is null and void, and they're married, and he has to pay her no matter what, because it's a definite. Here, the difference is it's not about if he's responsible or she's responsible, but rather the difference here is that it's not for sure that it will happen. Who said that she has to eat? He didn't. Did he say this get is not good unless you and you have? Did he say you have to eat? Right? It's not good if you don't eat. He only said, he said a condition. If you want a divorce, then you have to eat this pig. But she can decide not to eat and not get divorced. So he is not setting up a situation where it will be 100% be true that someone will violate the Torah. He's setting up a situation where she will decide, and she can decide yes or no. Therefore, it's not his responsibility. That's different from where it's 100% the case that he will have to violate the Torah, and that's why it's null and void. And that answers the question why in this case the condition, according to Rabbanan, is a valid condition. Rabbanan again say even impossible conditions are valid, even walking on water. So certainly eating pig is a valid condition, and we don't say that this is a condition to override the Torah, because it's not for sure that it will happen. She can decide not to violate the Torah. We now return to the Mishnah's case where the husband gives a get to his wife and says, this is on condition that you don't marry so and so. And this is a problematic stipulation. So what should he do since it is invalid? He has to take it back and give it to her again. Kesad yaseh yitelenu hemena. So we ask, Man tana amar Chizkiah Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Who is the author of this Mishnah? Chizkiah says that it must be Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer ad sheyitelenu hemena v'yachzor v'yitenen alav v'yomar la he gitech. We saw this in a Braita back on 78. That a case where for the husband puts the get on his wife while she is sleeping. Well, that is invalid. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said he has to take it back and give it to her again and say he gitech. Or when he said, here is a loan document, and she reads it, says a get. So it says you have to give it again. So he is the author of this part of the Mishnah that says when you say an invalid condition, according to Chachamim, this is an invalid condition when you make an exception for a certain person. So you have to take it back and give it again. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu Tema Rabbi. Rabbi Yochanan says I can even be Rabbi. Rabbi Asbiuda Nasi in that Mishnah says he doesn't have to take it back and give it again. He could just say while still in her hands, right? When she wakes up, this is your get. Or when she realizes it's a get, says, oh, that's not a loan document. This is your get. You don't have to take it and give it back. This could be Rabbi in this case. That you have to take it and give it back. What's the difference? Dilchon Amar. Rabbi Yochanan is telling Chizkiah. Chizkiah was from Bavel, and he's saying, someone from your place, Bavel. He's referring to Rav Kahana, also came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm quoting your fellow Babylonian. He explained this and said, Shaneh hacha, ho'il ukna'atu lipasel bo lichuna. Because in this case, the get is somewhat effective. It's effective enough that it makes her no law like a divorcee regarding the prohibition to marry a kohen. If the husband gives a get to his wife and says, here you are permitted to everyone except for the uven, even though according to Chamim the get is invalid and she can't use it to get remarried, nevertheless it's enough of a reach get that it makes her pasul kehuna. Since that giving was an effective act of giving, at least for the halacha of kehuna, even according to the Rabbi, he can't just say, oh, harezi gitech with no condition. He has to take it back and give it to her again. That's different from the case where she was sleeping, where it was not a giving at all, and she's still permitted to a kohen at that point. There, he doesn't have to take it back and give it again. The giving was a valid giving, and now then he can just say it. Okay, good. Now, The Mishnah continued and said, Kitavo betocho, if in the document itself he wrote in, you're permitted to everyone except for Reuven, then it's a problem. Even if you go and erase it, it's no good, because when the scribe first writes it, he has to be written correctly. Now we're going to deal with the question, what if while the scribe is writing it, the husband says, listen, when you're writing it, this should only be effective if she doesn't marry this person, right? Will that also invalidate the get if he says it, or only if it's actually written inside? Amar Rav Safra kitavo betocho tenan. So Rav Safra says the Mishnah should read if it's written in it. Now we wonder, Pishita, kitavo betocho tenan. That is our version of the Mishnah. It says kitavo betocho. That's what it says already in the Mishnah. So what is Rav Safra teaching us? מהודתמה הנמלה לאחר הטורף, אבל לפני הטורף אפילו על פה נמה פסול כמה שמע לן. If Rav Safra had not emphasized these words, then I might have thought that the problem of it being written is only after the main part. Remember, there's two parts, the torif and the tofes. So if you wrote the torif, okay, then I might have thought that it would be invalid in writing after the tofes, but aval lifnei toref afilu pe name pasul. But if it was before the toref, then even a verbal declaration would be no good. In other words, I might have thought, without Rav Safra's statement, that if during the writing, while the scribe is writing the main section, the first half, that not only is it invalid in writing, it's even invalid if the husband says while the sofer is writing, I want this condition. I want it to only be valid in a case where she doesn't marry this guy. And so I might have thought there, written or oral disqualifies, and the second half, it's only disqualifies if it's written, but if it's oral, then it's okay. And that's why Rav Safra comes and says, Kitavo betocho, if it's written anywhere, it's no good, but if it's oral anywhere, then that's okay. Even if the husband says, I want this condition, and even if he says it while the scribe is writing the first half, we ignore it, it's okay, because it's not written in it. So this is the more lenient interpretation of Rav Safra. Rava amar lo shanu ela lachar hatoref, aval lifnei hatoref afilu al pe name pasul. Rava says a different interpretation of the Mishnah, that the being in writing part is only, we only say that after the main section. After the main section is written, then it's no good, only if it's in writing. But if it's oral after the main section, then it's okay. But beforehand, meaning if it's while the scribe is writing the main section, then even if the scribe just says out loud and it's not written inside that I want this to be a condition, that get is invalid and cannot be used, because it has to be also written with the proper intention. Even if the wording is correct, for the first half it's essential. So you see, Rava has a more stringent position. Everybody agrees that for the second part of it, only if it's written in it, it's a problem. If it's oral, it's okay. But for the first part, there also everybody agrees if it's written in it, it's a problem. But if it's only oral in the first part, Rava says it's invalid. Rav Safra says it's okay. V'azda Rava l'ta'ameh, da'amar lehu Rava lahanhu dechati begitte, shetoku shetuke lebaal ad dechatbinu letoref degita. Rava is consistent with his own opinion, because Rava would tell the scribes writing a get that they should make sure the husband is silent until they finish writing the toref, the first part of the get. Do not say anything, because anything they say, I think it should only be valid if she doesn't marry that guy, that could invalidate the get. So you see that Rava thinks that an oral statement by the husband during the writing of the toref could make it invalid. Tino Rabbanan, Kol hatenaim poslin beget dibre Rabbi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says you should not put a condition in the writing of the get, a condition like you may marry, you can marry everybody on condition that you don't marry a Reuven. Do not write that in the get. even though technically that's a valid form, right? Even according to Chamim, that's a valid condition if said orally, but don't write it. Rabbi is concerned, as we'll see in a second, that if you allow writing almenat, then people will end up writing chutz, because people won't make a distinction between almenat and chutz. Therefore, make a gezerah. Do not put even the conditional statement, do not write it in the get. Hachamim אומרים כל שפוסל על פה פוסל בכתב וכל שאינו פוסל על פה אינו פוסל בכתב. Hachamim say if it's invalid when you say it, then it's invalid when you write it. But if it's not invalid when you say it, then it's not invalid when you write it. They're not worried that one's going to come to lead to the other. And so just like you can say you can marry everyone on condition that you don't marry that person, you can also write that same thing, and that's totally fine. You just the chutz either written or oral, that would be a problem. So therefore chutz sheposel al peh posel bichtav al menat she'eno posel al peh eno posel bichtav. Chachamim is continuing their explanation that the phrase chutz, which is no good when you say it orally, also will be no good if you write it in the document. But al menat, which is fine if he says it orally, is fine if you put it in the document. Okay, so the B is more machmir. Now, Amar Rabbi Zera machloket lifnei hatoref. The Rabbi sabar gazrinan al menat atu chutz. Rabbanan sabre lo gazrinan al menat atu chutz. Aval leachar hatoref divrei kol kasher. Rabbi Zera interprets this machloket a little bit more leniently and says they're only arguing in the main part, the first section of the get. That's where the B says we have to make a gezerah. If you write almenat, you may come to also write chutz. And Rabbanan say we don't make a gezerah for at all. However, after the main part, for the second part, which is less important, even the B says it's okay. You could write chutz in the second part. Now, our Mishnah, we established as talking about the case of chutz, and it says if you write it, it's no good. So that would mean if you write it in there, if you write chutz, it's no good. Aval almenat la pasil, we can infer from the Mishnah that if you wrote almenat, that would be valid. So who is the author of our Mishnah? Two possibilities. It could be that you wrote almenat even in the first half, and that would be Rabbanan, because we just said according to the Bizera, he thinks writing almenat in the get anywhere is totally fine. But not according to the B in the first half. Or the Mishnah could be the opinion of everyone, even the B. And it's talking about the second half. And the second half, that's where you can't write chutz, but you can write almenat. So there, for the Bizera, there are multiple possibilities of the authorship of the Mishnah. For Rava, however, he interprets this machloket more stringently, and so he'll have less options for the permission in the Mishnah to write almenat. Verava amar machloket la'achar hatoref. The Rabbi sabar gazrinan atu lifnei hatoref. V'Rabbanan sabre lo gazrinan atu lifnei hatoref. Rava says the machloket between Rabbi and Chachamim is after the main part, in the second part. And that's where the B says we have to make a gezerah. If you write almenat in the second part, then you may write almenat in the first part. And then you're going to also write chutz. So he makes a full gezerah. You cannot write a conditional form anywhere in the get. Whereas Rabbanan, no, in the first half, it's a problem. Don't write almenat, you're going to come to write chutz. But in the second half, we don't worry that if you write in the second half, then you're going to write it in the first half. Right? In the first half, in fact, everyone would agree that it's no good. That's Rava's interpretation of the machloket. So now, who's the author of the Mishnah? The Mishnah said, it's only a problem if you write chutz. We can infer that almenat is permitted. So where is almenat permitted? And according to whom? Only achar hatoref v'Rabbanan hi. Since everyone agrees that you cannot write almenat in the first half, so it can't be talking about that. It has to be talking about in the second half, and only Rabbanan permit it. So the Mishnah has to be only Rabbanan according to the interpretation of Rava. And we end with a quick conversation. Taneh Abu de Rabbi Abin Kameh de Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Abin said to Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera is the one that gave the first interpretation. Katav get al tenai divrei hakol pasul. Divrei hakol pasul ha miflag pelige. We have a baraita that says if you wrote a get and you put the condition in the get, everyone agrees it's no good. What do you mean everyone agrees it's no good? Actually, there's a machloket about that. We just saw the machloket, and according to the B, it's no good. According to Rabbanan, it's okay. So, right, in there, hamiflag peligya, in there machloket, ela ema ledivre hakol kasher, pechidame lachar hatoref. So the B says, oh, you got a wrong version of the Baraita. It is divrei hakol, but it's not pasul. Change pasul to kasher. And everyone agrees it's okay. Where, in which case does everyone agree it's okay? In the second half of the get, right? Even the B says it's okay to write a Tanai. And so that's how the B, Zera, could explain that baraita. Now we wonder, velema is a pasul v'rebi. Wait a second. Why not leave the pasul word and say it's not divrei hakol, it's rebi? If you write a get tanai in the get, then according to the B, it's no good, right? That would be consistent. So why are you changing pasul into kasher? Change divrei hakol into the B. And the answer is Tana divrei hakol atniyeh. Kasher bepasul michlaf le, hare ze b'divrei hakol la michlaf le. We know the types of mistakes that transmitters tend to make, and since he learned, the Tanat learned divrei hakol, so it's easy to mistake kasher and pasul. That happens, right? You make a mistake. But if it says you wouldn't say make a mistake of hare zeh to divrei hakol, right? You wouldn't make a mistake that this is only the B, right? It's only the opinion of the B with divrei hakol. If you would learn divrei hakol, then that certainly that certainly is accurate, right? Because that's a particular memorable phrase, and so we assume that the divrei hakol was remembered correctly. But pasul and kasher, those two words do sometimes interchange, and therefore that's why Rabbi Zera said it must be kasher, and that in fact it is the opinion of everyone. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.